Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. 9.1.5 is just around the corner, but Blizzard put up yet another blue post with bug fixes. Bug fixes are good, and with a game like World of Warcraft that's been built upon codes and codes and codes stacking on top of each other from different expansions of the vanilla, TBC, Wrath, and so on, it kind of becomes a spaghetti of code, where things are just wrapped up in weird ways and there's some buggy elements in the current version of the game. So it's good that they're going around fixing bugs. However, some of these bug fixes and changes actually end up nerfing hunters by quite a bit. So in this video we'll cover the hunter nerfs that have happened, as well as the bug fixes that have come into play and how they'll impact your classes, because you are looking at buffs and nerfs thanks to some of these changes when it comes to them removing some of the game bugs. Before we dive into the bugs, let's first talk about the auto attack ring from Court of Stars, the jeweled signet of Melandrius, getting reworked a little bit. This ring was expected to be a best in slot item as soon as patch 9.1.5 drops for any classes that benefit highly from auto attacks. The 10% base damage increase for your auto attacks is highly lucrative, especially since it will continue to scale as we get better gear. However, on PTR, this item was recently reworked to be a set number based on the ring's auto attack level. So at the base original, like if you go and do the mythic 0 dungeon of Court of Stars, it'll increase your auto attack by 2, not 2%, but just 2, flat number. At Time Warped 184 item level, it's increasing auto attacks by 13, not a percent, again, flat number. And at 246 scaled with Wowhead, it looks like it's going to increase your auto attack damage by 36. This is obviously a nerf to this ring, but it does prevent it from becoming a guaranteed best in slot once 9.1.5 hits. This is probably good because Legion Time Walking, this is where this ring comes from, with Legion Time Walking available every few weeks in the game, it means sometimes players will have to wait weeks and weeks and weeks until the event is up to even get a chance at the ring. And it doesn't guarantee that you'll get this ring every single time, just a chance at this ring if it stayed at the auto attack 10% damage increase. This is probably a best middle ground choice in order to make this ring less of a mandatory item, but still a useful item if you do pick it up from Legion Time Walking. Next, let's get into some of these bugs that end up nerfing some classes. Starting off with a vial of Serenity Curing ability, healing potions no longer reset melee swing timer, which means that certain melee classes could use the Curing ability to get 2 auto attacks off instead of 1. For Death Knights, the Curing ability, Shackle the Unworthy, can now spread when enemies are behind the Death Knight, which is going to make it more consistent. And apparently Unholy Assault Talent global cooldown was not properly reduced with haste. This is overall a buff towards Unholy Death Knight, and I guess curing Death Knights in general, even if it's a slight one. For Demon Hunters, the most important updates are: fix an issue where prevented Lost in Darkness Conduit from improving with higher ranks. For Havoc Demon Hunters, Dancing with Fate Conduit is nerfed slightly on PTR, but it is still a buff from the current 9.1 version, which we talked about in a few videos ago. They also fixed an issue where Dancing with Fate did not work for Death Sweep, which is a blade dance ability while inside a metamorphosis. Overall, for Havoc Demon Hunter, this is a nice buff. For Vengeance Demon Hunter, they made it so that demons summoned from Fodder to the Flame no longer scale with your health while inside a metamorphosis, so then they die faster, explode faster to do their damage, but also leave their soul on the ground faster for the Demon Hunter to pick it up for a much needed heal. For Hunters, we're seeing a nerf. Binding Shot root effect will now break once it receives enough damage. Most roots in a game like Mage's Nova or a Mass Entangle by the Druid do break after a set amount of damage has been dealt to the enemy. It's easy to see how this ends up being a pretty powerful utility that Hunters bring into dungeon groups. So this nerf changes the utility from an unbreakable root to a root with a threshold. This threshold is supposed to be higher than other roots, but upon testing on PTR, players found out that right now it takes about 24,000 points of damage to break this root. Normally that wouldn't be a bad number, but in Mythic Pluses, when it comes to the mage combusting and the boomy dropping down starfalls, that's a lot of damage that's going to go out and hit everything in front of you. This is also an obvious hit in terms of their survivability within PvP when they sometimes need to use kiting and roots as part of their defensive toolkit. While not a lot of people are happy about this change, there is at least a defensive that got finally fixed in 9.1.5. If a hunter is playing Marksman's Advantage Defensive Conduit, it no longer gets removed from the enemy player or from a boss, for example. What this conduit does is when the hunter marks an enemy with Hunter's Mark, and if they're using Marksman's Advantage Conduit, which is a defensive conduit, it passively reduces the amount of damage that enemy that's marked by the hunter does to the hunter. So if let's say you put it on Sylvanas or Kel'Thuzad instead of Sanctum of Domination, that boss and their abilities will do slightly less damage to the hunter. That number is small, but with how squishy hunters are, it is a helpful defensive, especially when you overlap it with other defensive conduits. The problem is if another hunter ran the same conduit and marked the enemy that you marked with Hunter's Mark, it will remove your Hunter's Mark, but also most importantly your conduit debuff. So now that no longer gets removed, so you'll still be able to retain the defensive even if another hunter in your raid is marking the target. The mage buffs we talked about, Icicles, Frostbolt, and Flurry are getting buffed, but again, we mentioned that earlier, a couple days ago. For Mystery or Monk, they actually fixed an issue where double Expel Harm could be used if they're channeling Soothing Mist on themselves, and they press Expel Harm, and they get a second Expel Harm to be used at once. For Rogues, they fixed an issue where Flagellation, Venti, or Covenant ability would always critical strike with Symbols of Death. Now, I don't know what they mean by always critical strike. Does that mean you press Symbols of Death and you press Flagellation and the initial impact crits? Or while Symbols of Death is up, Flagellation constantly crits every time it procs? Because if it ticks all the time, that would explain why Rogues are so damn bursty in PvP. Also, we talked about it earlier 2 videos ago, but Fury Warrior's auto attack damage has been increased by 43%. For PvP specific bug fixes, Thorns can no longer reflect damage if the target is more than 10 yards away. Floor Recycling Conduit, which we talked about a couple days ago, is going to reduce in effectiveness by 50% in PvP. Apparently, hunters can no longer capture flags in battlegrounds while under the effects of Feigned Death. And apparently for Beastmaster Hunter, if you played with an exotic pet that uses an ability called Burrow Attack, its cooldown apparently was unintentionally reduced with Kindred Beast PvP talent. Arcane Mages rejoice, you can finally use Mana Gym instead of battlegrounds and rated arenas. They also fixed an issue where Fire Mage's Mastery in Phoenix Flames could hit a rogue while under the effects of Cloak of Shadows. Also, Subtlety rogues that would use Shadowy Duel while under the effects of Blessing Protection no longer become completely invisible. Decimating Bolt's Necrolord ability damage bonus for Demon Bolt, Shadow Bolt, and Incinerate can no longer be dispelled in PvP, which seems like a must-needed change. And besides a couple Torghast power adjustments, that's more or less the important stuff on this bug list. So this change adjusted rogues so they can do some cheesy things, allow classes to actually use certain conduits properly, which is going to be a damage increase overall. Beast Mastery in some small way got nerfed sorta kinda, but also marksmanship hunters, as well as I guess survival and beast mastery that do run the talent of Binding Shot, all of them got nerfed for dungeons. I want to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think about these changes? And I'm interested to see what Blizzard's response is going to be to the hunter outcry on the Binding Shot nerf going forward. Do you like hearing about hunter nerfs? Because we've got one last one for beast mastery in PvP. It's not the biggest nerf, but at least it's something for many players that want to see beast mastery hunters stomped out of arenas and battlegrounds. The ability of Bestial Wrath that buffs the damage of you and your pet by 25% for 15 seconds with a pretty big cooldown reduction mechanic with Barb Shot. This ability is getting nerfed slightly in PvP, from a PvP multiplier of 1 to a PvP multiplier of 0.8, which sounds to me like a 20% nerf to Bestial Wrath. I don't think it's a nerf to the actual damaging aspect of Bestial Wrath. I think it's a nerf towards the actual damage increase in PvP. So they're nerfing that 25% damage buff by 20%. At least that's how I'm reading it right now. While Bestial Wrath isn't the strongest ability like Paladin Wings or Seraphim or Combustion for mages or Shadow Blades for rogues or a variety of other buff-based abilities, it is something that they use pretty regularly to dish out more damage. Beastmaster Hunters are masters at huge sustained pressure, not really bursty class. And Bestial Wrath is an ability that's up almost always whenever they're doing base sustained damage, with its cooldown being so short thanks to Bestial Wrath reducing its cooldown from Barb Shots. So this is still going to be somewhat of a nerf towards Beast Mastery, not on the base damage, but the damage that it's amped by Bestial Wrath. So we'll see how that pans out when it comes to PvP. Thank you guys so for checking out this video and checking out the bugs. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts about some of these nerfs we've gotten all of a sudden. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.